In the heart of a nation torn apart, where brother fought against brother, a seismic shift reshaped the very fabric of America. The American Civil War, lasting from 1861 to 1865, was not just a clash of arms or a contest for territory, it was a pivotal moment that altered the path of history itself. You might be wondering, how did this brutal conflict redefine a nation and echo through the ages? What lessons can we uncover that resonate with our present day? Stick around, and you'll discover insights that may change the way you think about freedom, unity, and the moral fabric of society. As we delve into this complex chapter of history, we must first grapple with the enormity of its consequences. Over 600,000 soldiers lost their lives, entire cities were laid waste, and the wounds of war ran deep into the American psyche. But beyond the human cost, the war catalyzed transformative changes, social, political, and economic, that would ripple through generations. The abolition of slavery, for instance, was not just a moral victory, it set a precedent for civil rights and social justice movements that continue to resonate in our society today. Picture this: cities bustling with industry, the expansion westward, and an ever-evolving landscape of civil rights. But this was the America that rose from the ashes of the Civil War, shaped by struggles that forced the nation to confront its moral dilemmas. What comes next will leave you speechless, as we explore how the echoes of the Civil War reached into the 20th century and beyond, influencing everything from the labor movement to the civil rights movement. Let's begin by unraveling the core issue that ignited this great conflict, the fight over slavery. You see, for many in the South, the economic framework was deeply intertwined with the institution of slavery. Conversely, in the North, a growing abolitionist sentiment was championing freedom and equality. This diverging perspective led to a clash not just over the fate of enslaved persons, but over the very definition of American identity. The war's end didn't just bring victory for the Union, it brought a philosophical reckoning that demanded the nation redefine who it was meant to be. But what emerged as a tangible legacy of this bloody struggle? The Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863 was a bold, unprecedented move. It didn't just free enslaved individuals in Confederate-controlled territories, it reframed the war as a fight for human freedom itself. Suddenly, liberation became inseparable from the Union victory. You might be surprised to learn that it also marked a pivotal shift in the perception of the federal government as an active force against oppression, setting the stage for future federal interventions in civil rights. As the layers of history unfold, consider this: the war also forged a new political landscape in the United States. The Reconstruction era, which followed, was filled with both promise and peril. New amendments to the Constitution, namely the 13th, 14th, and 15th, ensured freedom, citizenship, and voting rights for African Americans. This was monumental. However, the struggle was far from over as systemic racism and the rise of Jim Crow laws sought to undermine these gains. At this juncture, we must pause and reflect: how do societies reconcile with their darker past? The truth is, the American South grappled with its defeat and ideologies that clung to old societal norms, perpetuating divisions that would simmer for decades. The legacy of the Civil War became a battleground for contrasting narratives about freedom, justice, and race relations. And with every uprising, every act of defiance, the nation was reminded that the fight for true equality was far from complete. Let's take a moment to examine the soldiers themselves, these brave men who fought in grueling battles. Who were they? What drove them to risk their lives? Surprisingly, not all were driven by the same beliefs. Some fought for the Union out of a sense of duty, while others were swayed by the ideals of abolitionism. The South, too, saw soldiers motivated by loyalty to their states, their families, and a way of life that was being threatened. All these men, regardless of their motivations, found themselves entwined in a larger story, a story that would define the American experience and legacy. But in the aftermath of the war, there was an unquenchable thirst for progress. Some former slaves embraced education and activism, laying the groundwork for future leaders in the fight for civil rights. Figures like Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth emerged as powerful voices, advocating for equality and social justice. These leaders demonstrated that the American story was far from stagnant. It was a living, breathing narrative of change. And speaking of change, the technological advancements that emerged in the post-war era also reshaped the nation. The war stimulated innovations in manufacturing, transportation, and communication. Railroads expanded westward, and with them came opportunities and conflicts that would shape American society. The rapid industrialization that followed the Civil War set the stage for the roaring economic growth of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Could it be that a nation forged in the fires of war was destined for unimaginable growth? Let's switch gears and turn our attention to the profound impact on women during and after the Civil War. Initially, many women took on roles traditionally held by men, managing farms and businesses while their husbands, brothers, and fathers were away. The war challenged the traditional gender roles, igniting movements for suffrage and women's rights. Did you know that pivotal figures like Clara Barton, who became the founder of the American Red Cross, found their calling in wartime service? The ripple effect on gender roles would resonate well into the future, as women began to demand a seat at the table in shaping the nation's future. You might be surprised to learn that the Civil War also affected international relations and perceptions of democracy. As Europe watched the American experiment unfold, countries such as Britain and France were forced to reckon with their own colonial practices and values of freedom and liberty. The legacy of the Civil War prompted thinkers and activists worldwide to challenge inequities, emphasizing the interconnectedness of democracy beyond American borders. Would the war's lessons embolden global movements for liberty and social justice beyond the shores of America? While the immediate aftermath of the war found the nation trying to piece itself back together, a more profound transformation was brewing beneath the surface. The late 19th century saw the rise of labor movements, spurred by the desire for workers' rights amidst rapid industrialization. The struggles of workers echoed the earlier fight for civil rights, with parallels drawn between racial equality and labor rights. What this means is that the Civil War and its repercussions were not just about slavery but laid a foundation for all forms of social justice. As we navigate these interconnected stories, let's take a closer look at the ways in which the Civil War influenced cultural expressions. Literature, music, art, the fabric of American culture reflects this tumultuous time. Writers like Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson grappled with the themes of loss and hope in their work. The visual art that emerged from this period often depicted the war's raw emotions, revealing a society wrestling with trauma and identity. Imagine the power of a nation reflecting on its own wounds through these expressions. This was the creative ferment that emerged from the crucible of conflict. Engaging with the complexity of the Civil War leads us toward a profound revelation. As the United States battled over its conscience, it became a catalyst for broader discussions about human rights. The fight for abolition did not end with the Civil War. It continued to inspire generations of activists who fought against oppression in various forms. The struggles of African Americans, women, and laborers in the ensuing decades echoed the fight for freedom that began in the 1860s. There's so much more to uncover regarding how this great conflict reshaped the trajectory of not just America but global notions of freedom and democracy. We are on the verge of exploring significant themes like reconciliation, the long shadow of racism, and how the post-war period would shape America's role in the world. So, stay tuned, because in our second part, we will dive deeper into these transformative themes, revealing the surprising legacies that reach into our current social landscape and continue to challenge our understanding of justice and equality. How did the lessons of the Civil War help to sculpt the civil rights movements of the 20th century? And what echoes of those battles still resonate in our conversations today? Join me as we continue this exciting journey of discovery through one of the defining moments in American history. As we continue our exploration of the American Civil War's enduring influence, we must turn our attention to the complex relationship between reconciliation and remembrance. the end of the war did not produce a singular national narrative. Instead, it spawned multiple versions of history, each reflecting differing perspectives on the conflict and its outcomes. The Lost Cause narrative, popularized in the South, painted the Confederacy as noble defenders of states' rights and a unique cultural heritage. This interpretation sought to legitimize and romanticize the South's motives, while simultaneously glossing over the fundamental role of slavery in the war. Conversely, the North's narrative emphasized liberation and the preservation of the Union. This division in collective memory continued to shape regional identities and political dialogues well into the 20th century. The painful truths of the Civil War became enshrined in monuments, literature, and discussions surrounding memorialization. This cultural schism prompts an essential question: how do we find common ground in narratives so fundamentally different? At the heart of this question lies the ongoing struggle for racial equality and justice that emerged in the post-war years. The end of the Civil War saw the birth of the Reconstruction era, a time filled with hope and setbacks. Although the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments provided a legal framework for equality, societal implementation proved elusive. The Southern states, resistant to change, enacted Jim Crow laws that enforced segregation and disenfranchisement, thereby creating a legal portrait of oppression. These systemic injustices served to reinforce racial divisions, leading to widespread violence against African Americans and perpetuating cycles of poverty and discrimination. However, the spirit of empowerment ignited by the Civil War spawned a relentless wave of activism. Organizations like the Freedmen's Bureau were established, playing a crucial role in education and securing rights for newly freed African Americans. It was during this time that public figures and activists emerged as catalysts for social change. Leaders like Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois began to articulate a vision of civil rights that demanded not just legal recognition, but an acknowledgement of the inherent value of Black lives and culture. Their efforts laid the groundwork for future generations, making the civil rights movement a continuation of the struggles initiated during and after the Civil War. As time marched on into the 20th century, the echoes of the Civil War resonated with those fighting for labor rights. The struggles of workers became interconnected with the pursuits of African Americans for justice, as both groups sought dignity within a rapidly changing society. The rise of the labor movement brought to light the serious inequities faced by industrial workers, many of whom were immigrants or people of color. Just as the Civil War had been fought on the moral grounds of slavery, labor fights would challenge the very foundations of economic justice and equality. The common thread of social justice and activism began to weave itself into a broader tapestry of American identity. With the Great Migration, millions of African Americans moved from the rural South to northern cities in search of better lives and opportunities. Their influx into urban centers wasn't just a shift in demographics, it marked a cultural transformation that infused American cities with vibrant new expressions of art, music, and political thought. The Harlem Renaissance, for example, was a flourishing of African American culture that provided a platform for voices that echoed the fight for equality for generations to come. As we approach mid-20th century America, the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s can be viewed as a direct descendant of the battles fought during and after the Civil War. Leaders such as Martin Luther King, Jr., Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks leveraged the ideals of freedom and justice reframed by the Civil War and Reconstruction, inspiring a nation to confront its inequalities. Their voices echoed the pain and struggles of their ancestors, culminating in landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These movements were characterized not only by a demand for equal rights but also by a profound re-examination of the moral core of American democracy. The question of what it truly meant to pursue happiness and achieve liberty for all was thrown into sharp relief. At the heart of the struggle was the understanding that freedom could not be segmented by race, class, or gender, rather, it had to be holistic. Thus, the lessons of the Civil War reshaped the discourse of human rights and highlighted the unfinished task of true equality. Fast forward to the present day, and the legacy of the Civil War remains a living dialogue in our society. The Black Lives Matter movement, the #MeToo movement, and ongoing protests for labor rights are all modern responses to the same undercurrents of social injustice that have ebbed and flowed throughout American history. Were it not for the struggles birthed in the Civil War era, today's activists would be lacking historical context, strategies, and frameworks for fighting against oppression. Moreover, as we ponder the recent battles over historical memorialization and the renaming of public spaces, it's essential to recognize how far we've come, yet how far we still have to go. The removal of Confederate statues in many cities ignited passionate debates around race, history, and remembrance. What does it mean to honor a legacy steeped in oppression? In these discussions, we can trace the lasting impact of the Civil War as a continuing catalyst for re-examining values and pushing for social justice. As we stand at this crossroads, it becomes clear that the Civil War did so much more than settle a contentious issue. It initiated a prolonged dialogue about freedom, equality, and the responsibilities of citizenship that thrives to this day. What will emerge from our current social and political movements? Will we learn and evolve from the lessons etched in the history of our nation? In conclusion, the American Civil War was not merely a warfare of the past, it was a predicator of future struggles for rights and justice. The refrain for freedom that resonated on the battlefields has become a profound echo that reverberates throughout our current socio-political landscape. By examining its legacy, we unearth the vital lessons that challenge us to ensure freedom and dignity for all. As we embark on our own paths of advocacy, remember that history is not simply a tale of what has come before us, it is a living narrative that guides our footsteps today. The burden of equality has not yet been fully realized, and the fight is far from over. The Civil War serves as a potent reminder that, while battles may be won, the quest for lasting justice is ongoing, compelling each of us to take up the mantle of change. How will your story add to this ever-evolving narrative of freedom? What legacy will you help create for future generations? The answers lie within you, waiting to be written as we continue the work of what it means to be truly, indivisibly American.